Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about The Wild Robot, the latest film from DreamWorks Animation, and it's directed by Chris Sanders, who I think is most known, or how I know him at least, is because he co-directed Lilo and Stitch and is the voice of Stitch, and co-directed How to Train Your Dragon. I haven't really liked anything since him and Dean Deblas kind of split up for whatever reason. I don't think there's bad blood. Dean Deblas actually executive produces this film, so at least they're in an office together and they waved hey or something. But this movie, I sort of think, is a big kind of culmination of what Chris Sanders does so well as an auteur or as a creative force, much like Lilo and Stitch and much like How to Train Your Dragon, is very much a fish out of water story. But I think in both cases, and in this, it tells the story of a fish out of water and how basically that fish or this robot not only changes the area around it, but the area around it changes them. And nothing changes you more than parenthood, the way it happens to Roz the robot in this film. And I think this is sort of feels a bit of a culmination between the other two. I know he directed The Croods. I didn't really like that much, and I didn't see the live action movie he did, but to be 100, and I know this is based on a book, but it does fit within the auteur thing of him and all that stuff. But I do think this is maybe his more sort of artistic film, but also still being the kind of big studio animation director that he is. And this is kind of the last DreamWorks movie animated and completed all in-house. After this one, they're just going to rely heavily on like outside vendors and outside studios. So this is kind of the end in a lot of ways. And I think it is a glorious end, but it's sort of a glorious celebration of the kind of artistic opus. I mean, this is the studio that's released a Charlie Kaufman movie and this in the same year, which is pretty amazing in itself. But I think this one hits at something kind of very universal, very relatable, very much feels like a story you've seen before and one you know you're going to see again. Something I felt when I was watching the beginning of this movie. I didn't feel as compelled, but I also felt like well, I'm gonna see this again. Like not like, oh, it's Chris Sanders, like I'm just gonna watch it again because like I like his other two movies or something. I mean, there's a little of that, but also like thinking like this is really good. I think this is not the first time, and like almost recognizing it, at least for me as a viewer, noticing that it's one of the few films, and I took my daughter and we had a great time. That's one of the few films I've seen where a regular kind of screening with, you know, paid for a ticket and stuff, and everyone clapped at the end. I never see that anymore at a regular kind of screening like that, and I think it is well deserved and shows much more of a sort of complexity in using the big Hollywood animation machine to work in a very gentle, thought-provoking kind of film about parenthood and how it changes you, how the environment changes you, and the responsibilities you take on as a person, even though, you know, it is about a robot, but, or maybe the responsibilities you take on, the responsibilities the conscious take on. How about that? There we go. So we get there. The Wild Robot is about Roz, who's a robot who's mainly made to help humans, because humans don't like to think for themselves anymore, I guess, and that continues then. And so, presumably in the future, and Roz is the shipping container Roz was in. Roz is put onto this island where it's all animals and there's no humans, and isn't sure what to do because Roz is supposed to help people. And then Roz kind of hankers down for long enough to have stuff growing on him, so I don't know how long that is, and then is able to understand the animals, so that thus celebrity voices can talk. And during an incident with a bear, crushes a mother goose and her other eggs, but a little gosling remains. So Roz works with a fox, voiced by Pedro Pascal, to raise this little gosling from a little one to be able to swim and to fly away before the winter. And you kind of see that evolution of this robot raising a gosling through their childhood to be able to fly away and migrate before the winter. Which I find frustrating is when I looked at reviews of this, a lot of people I think thought this was going to have less dialogue and be more sort of artistic or something. And I did think that when I saw the first trailers that it would be like that. Despite the robot looking like it's from Castle in the Sky, it is not really a Miyazaki film. It is a movie made by DreamWorks. It's directed by, Lilo and Stitch's fairly populous kind of movie, same with How to Train Your Dragon. So to me, it's like they're not. I knew what I was getting into. I'm a little confused by the criticism that they wish there were less celebrity voices, and I knew where like the beaver with the tree. I knew that obviously that was going to be a plot point, but to me, it's like they don't. Him and Chris Sanders and Dean Develis do not make they make artistic studio movies, but they're making studio movies, and like to me, this is a studio movie, and like its trappings were not things like I complained about specifically with this film. I think that's sort of a waste of time. I'm very much like these guys, so it's like some directors I've thought about for a while, so maybe that's my different perspective. I find it to be a silly perspective, to be honest with you, because it's like you're not taking into account the context to which this creator is working. But anyway, I just find that to be odd. However, I actually thought like how they use the celebrity voices like Matt Berry and Ving Rhames and Catherine O'Hara and Mark Hamill and Stephanie Hsu and Bill Nighy and everybody, like sparingly. It felt like you're more with the little Gosling and the Fox voiced by Pedro Pascal and the Roz voiced by Lupita Nyong'o more, and the celebrity voices were kind of sparingly come in and out. I thought it worked really well within that. It felt a lot more patient than something like, a Kung Fu Panda 4 or a Trolls 3, I think. Those feel more hyperactive. This feels like it's consciously taking its time and felt very different to me. I don't know what everybody else's fucking deal is, but to me it felt like a very patient, smart kind of film. Obviously, you can see shades of Iron Giant. You can see obviously influences of Studio Ghibli. I know they're influenced by Studio Ghibli and like classic Disney, which I get the impression like 50s, but sure, around there, I'm not sure. I got that from it, but what I mainly get from it is I think there is a thing about movies about someone being a parent, and I think there are other stories about parenting, and I think a lot of people feel like, for example, that this film should have ended at a certain logical point, I guess, to them. But in my mind, this story is not about the Gosling necessarily. Gosling's a major part of it. There's a major part of the plot and stuff. The story is about Roz, and Roz's story continues much like your parents continue after they have kids. And I think a lot of people don't want to get into that. Maybe that's some of the frustration there. And I did feel like when you grow older, you feel like maybe you're part of a community, maybe you're part of something, especially after, your kid goes away and stuff. So I did feel like the film going into that, I thought was actually kind of interesting. Any of its big studio trapping things, I thought they were sparingly or smarter about, particularly like the end kind of big explosion-y set piece, I thought was done in a way to show more teamwork and less like explodey stuff. Like it felt like, maybe it felt to other people like a compromise. To me, it didn't feel like a compromise. It felt like somebody, a patient studio director working within the system and knowing how to use it. I know that's not the coolest way to be an auteur, but I think he did it very well. I particularly like seeing Roz. Like, you see that character. I think Lupita Nyong'o is a much more interesting actress than we give her credit for, because she does, like I've heard in interviews, she does kind of consciously pick more interesting roles. Maybe, it's a cover or something, But I think this is a really smart performance, because it's like you're basically playing an emotionless robot who's sort of like learning through it, and I thought it was actually a really great performance. And they're able to show the evolution of this robot who shouldn't be someone you can, lead a movie with, and they did a very good job. I've never read the book by Peter Brown. I understand there's multiple books. Maybe we'll get more of these, although it'll probably be different how this is. I like the paintbrush stroke thing. I have not seen the second Puss in Boots. I know. I'm sorry. I don't know why. It's just life. But the painterliness of it, I sort of liked at first. I thought it like felt too pixely, didn't feel real, but I definitely liked it. I liked how this also showed how scary nature can be and how people can die and things can die, which I was surprised it really went in that direction. It did it in funny ways, it did it in scary ways, it did it in sad ways, but it was never like not there. They don't overwhelm you with it. It's not a dark indie movie, but they do bring it up enough times where it's like you understand the reality of it. I do think it is more of like an older kids movie. I think your kids have to have a little patience for this. And anyone really does, but I quite really like this. And I think what I like about Chris Sanders from his other work is he's able to say things about family and relationships, and like every single one is about a family, you know, whether it's Hiccup and Toothless, or whether it's about Lilo and Stitch and everything going on there. And this, it's like about like literally a family, like a found family. And I thought it worked really, really well within that, and what the ramifications of that found family are and everything. You know, I get that like sometimes this film does spell things out to you, but to me it's like, again, I understood the context, so I don't I don't understand these criticisms, to be totally honest with you. I do think DreamWorks is in such an interesting place right now, and they're doing a lot of original films, more so than any other major animation studio. Between this and the often overlooked this year Orion in the Dark, and even Ruby Gillman last year, each one looks totally different and are very different writer-director wise, and you know, it's really fascinating. And design-wise, they're just like different movies through and through, and it's like the versatility of DreamWorks. I really like. I still find like the creativity of this film, I find it to be really smart and really intelligent, and really using like the locations and the relationships and coming back to them and using the audience's familiarity. And I do think this film has a lot of faith in its audience, more so than a lot of these bigger animated films or any big studio films. Like it might be very obvious what's going to happen, but it's obvious because it has faith in you as an audience. Like it's like, you know that tree's gonna fall, but you know it's gonna be important at some point. You know that, but at a certain point, it's gonna wait it out with you, and it knows, you know, and they're like, let's play with it. And I thought, you know, not seeing characters like Matt Berry's character, Ving Rhames and stuff, and like having them come in and come out and stuff, I thought was actually really, really cool. And no one's saying a stupid catchphrase or coming in to do that. I thought it was a really kind of smart, interesting, and also science fiction way to show, you know, a community, as well as growing up and growing through these things, and how important that is, and taking responsibility and understanding your task ahead, but also understand, you know, you're taking on a responsibility, but one day, even though that responsibility is your entire world, that responsibility ends at a certain point, and you need to do more with yourself. And I think this brings on bigger issues. I actually was thinking that like it says some very obvious things, but it's very good at them. I think sometimes animation is very good at saying a very pointed piece of dialogue that, like, if you did that in a live action film, it wouldn't fly so well. And in animation, people will sort of listen to it, and it'll go over much better. And I felt like that a lot, particularly about the parenting stuff. I love the chemistry between everyone, and I thought it's one of probably my favorite DreamWorks films. It's definitely one of the best animated films of the year, and probably I'd say one of the best films of the year. I honestly want to see it again. It felt almost too perfect in a lot of ways. I don't know if it is, you know, maybe there are some tiny flaws or something, but I thought like everything it accomplished within its runtime, and everything Chris Sanders was able to accomplish, and with a mainstream film, it still feels like a mainstream film. I do think like a lot of audiences like Hollywood movies, but they don't want to see the typical Hollywood film, and I don't think this is, honestly. I think it's like smart enough to not be it, while also knowing it has to weave within it. And it's a hard thing to do, and I see more failures with that than successes. And I think The Wild Robot managed to make a patient, smart film about family, robotics, consciousness, and responsibility and community, while also doing all the things that a DreamWorks movie should. And that's not something I really see to the point that it does. And this is probably creatively an incredible year for DreamWorks. But also, I think this film is able to capture a part of consciousness and humanity and our ever-growing understanding of each other, and kind of a nature versus nurture argument of who we are as people and how we change through our experiences, through our responsibilities, who we choose to love, and what we come out as in the end. And I think The Wild Robot shows you that well-rounded view of who we are and who you are and who you will be. And you just leave watching and knowing you will always be yourself, but you'll be transformed sort of by the journey to get there. So if you've seen The Wild Robot and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like.